Good. Thank you for sticking around. I got a little worried. People were starting to run for the doors. I was like, Naveen's always a tough act to follow. So, but appreciate it. I realize I'm the last guy between you and lunch, so I get that. So enough about me. But if you need to get in touch with me, QR code there. Love to take connections on LinkedIn. So let's talk about the heart of the matter here. If you look at 14971 in the management kind of responsibilities area, they talk about one of the responsibilities is to set the policy for what the company is going to do in terms of how far is it going to take the effort to reduce risks. And the standard in a note, not as a requirement, says, well, we kind of see these three possibilities. You've got ALARP as low as reasonably practicable, which says you keep going until you either run out of technical options or the economic reality is such that the device would be so expensive nobody would buy it or reimburse for it. Okay, what they call economic practicability versus technical practicability. There's the as far as possible, or AFAP, which says you keep reducing as long as there are options, you keep going until you'd have a negative effect on the benefits, as Naveen just talked about, right? And then the last one is as low as reasonably achievable, ALARA, which sounds a lot like the first one. And it's very simple, except it focuses only on the technical practicability piece, right? There's no economic piece to it. So they offer you these three options. And then, and Naveen even mentioned this, right? There's this assumption, I think that's pretty prevalent, that the EU requires you to pick the second one. And when 14971 came out in 2012, that version, the EU hated it. They put a wrapper around it in 2014 for the EN version and said, by the way, no ALARP. ALARA wasn't even in the discussion, right? We are going AFAP, right? So last year, there was a kind of a heated debate went on LinkedIn. A gentleman posed a poll and just asked a simple question. Does the EU require risks to be reduced as far as possible? How many of you would agree that it does? Okay, anybody think that it does not? Okay, so we have no does not, the others must be undecideds in there, which is fine, right? Because that's just this. And I got stuck in the middle of this, what we used to call in the old days flame wars, going back and forth. The gentleman who posed the question was trying to stir the pot, and his opinion was, no, the EU does not require that across the board. By the way, in the poll, I think it was like 93% of the answers were yes, it does. Okay, and some people who were at this conference were in on that, and so it was pretty heated. But it got me thinking. For those of you who raised your hand and said yes, I agree, EU does require that. How do you know that? Why do you know that? Okay, notified bodies. I asked myself the same question, Steve. Why am I arguing so heavily in saying, yes, it says that? How do I know? How many of you have read the MDR IVDR cover to cover? Oh, I didn't think I'd get any hands, because I did it now in order to do this presentation. So that's what I'm going to do. Let's step through it and see what it actually says in there and see if we can find the pattern, okay? So it starts pretty early. You get into the preface in the IVDR. There's no equivalent to this statement in the MDR, but it, boom, right out of the gate, okay? There it is. The requirement to reduce risks as far as possible should be fulfilled, blah, 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 okay? So you get it pretty quickly in the IVDR. You go into the preface a little further, and now it's in both the MDR and the IVDR, and it says, in order to minimize risks or prevent incidents, all right, so we're using a little bit different terminology about minimizing risks, all right? So the little play on the words there. And so I looked up, okay, wait, what does minimize mean? Let's see if I, we got some clarity on that. I looked at various dictionaries. And to reduce something to at least the lowest possible level, to reduce or keep to a minimum, to reduce to the smallest possible. Okay, so reduce and minimize are synonyms, is what I take away from this. Okay, so I'm still okay with the fact that they changed words midstream as we were going through the preface here. Then we jump down to the annexes. The rest of the MDR and IVDR don't say anything until you get to the general safety and performance requirements. And then when you get in there, lots of opportunities. And so I went through and I tried to find all the things that sounded like a reference to risk reduction of some sort. And you find it pretty quickly, right? Number 2, right? They jump right into it again. Reduce risks as far as possible. Do I have to keep reading? I don't know. Well, I'm curious. I probably should just keep going and see what's going. But it does seem, that we're on the right track. Just a little bit later, though, we get Judged acceptable. Okay, completely different kind of wording there. And Naveen just talked about what does acceptable mean in terms of benefit risk. What would that imply in terms of reduction? And then there's this, a sub-bullet there, eliminate or reduce risk as far as possible. Okay, there it is. It's still there, okay? They're expanding on it. They're just, going different ways. Get down to number 5. There it is again, reduce, okay. Steve, this is getting boring. Except on number 8, that word minimize creeps back in again. You go, all right, what's going on here? But we talked about minimize and reduce is the same, but they don't really talk about how far to go, just to minimize. And then you have to sort of read between the lines and go, what does that imply? We keep going. Then we get the chemical, physical, and biological properties. And we get minimize the risk. And you keep going. We get reduce as far as possible. Note the numbering. These things are like right next to each other, essentially. And they're all over the place. All right, 10.5 goes to reduce as far as possible. The IVDR numbering is a little bit different here, but if you've read both, you realize they're like 90% the same. I don't know why they wrote 2 of them. Just seems like a waste of paper, but anyway. So the pattern is continuing. All right, section 10, if we're taking a vote, it's 3-to-1, right? Using the term, as far as possible. All right, so we seem to be doing okay there. And then you trip across this. And this is the one that really caught me off guard, okay? When we get into it's still same section, right? In the middle of it is as low as reasonably practicable. Wait, the EU said it hated ALARP. How did this creep into its regulation then? Right? That was the biggest shock, was to see that just glaring off the page at me. Right? So let's hold that for a second and just remember we've got this one outlier here so far that seems to confuse things. We keep going. We move into another section. All right, reduce as far as possible, reduce as far as possible. Okay, good, that section's pretty good. We're going to throw a minimize in there, but we're okay with that, we've said, because of the fact that it's a synonym. Go on a little further. We get into construction of devices and interaction with their environment. Minimize all possible risks. All right, we've got another phrase that didn't appear before. And we have to start thinking about this. All right, I get the similarities, but then we're back to reduce as far as possible. You sort of get the sense that there were several committees working on this, and the editor wasn't doing their job, making sure that everybody was consistently calling things the same things. But they're so close together in numbering, you go, that must be the same committee. How did they not get the wording consistent there? We got another minimize in there. Keep going there. Protection against radiation. All right, we're back to reduce as far as possible. Reducing as far as possible. Reducing as far as possible. Reducing as far as possible. All right, okay, good. This has got easy again. All right, we keep cruising along. Now we got another word. Eliminate or reduce as far as possible. So we've expanded on the definition here. All right, is that a problem or not? I get it, right? The goal of risk management, right, is to reduce or mitigate, right, because elimination is hard to do, right? It's a good thing to try, but it isn't always easy. Although, if you're familiar, I was having a conversation with somebody last night, and the name Trevor Kletz came up. He's sort of one of the forerunners of risk management in the chemical processing industry, and he had a great quote that said, "What isn't there can't leak." Right? And he was espousing for, if you can eliminate it, that's the best approach, right? But otherwise, you got to look at your reduction options there. So continuing along this, we get into active devices, and we got, there's that eliminate and reduce as far as possible again. It continues on doing okay. Avoid as far as possible. All right, how'd that one get in there? God, these guys are horrible at writing these regulations, and they just sort of open up this debate on what are they really trying to tell us here. But at least it was as far as possible, right? But avoid versus reduce. All right, I got that one highlighted. We'll have to come back to that. Oh my God, they picked another one. Protect as far as possible. All right, we're on the same theme with the far as possible, but we're adding all these other qualifiers in there. You get down to active implantables. And now we're putting in remove or minimize. So that would sort of bring in both eliminate and reduce. But again, at least we got as far as possible in there. They talk about 3 different types of risk more specifically from there. Keep moving on. Oh, this is different wording. Reduce to the lowest possible level. So we're back to having to decide, does that mean the same thing as far as possible? So you got to keep your dictionary open the whole time, looking at synonyms and going, which one's going to tell me the right thing here? And then the last one in here around terminals and connectors just says minimize all possible risks. All right, I'm not sure that's telling me the same kind of thing there. Oh, okay, another one, prevent as far as possible. All right, and then we get into here where we got laypersons, and we have 2 reduce as far as possible references there as well. So, all right, great. And then, for the self-testing devices out of the IVDR, it has a very equivalent kind of statement around going as far as possible there as well. So let's go back and see what we found here. Okay, that's everything that I found in there that sounded like some sort of take on how far do you have to go with this. So the word eliminate showed up 3 times in there. Okay, a quick pull-up definition: completely remove or get rid of something. The word remove shows up twice: eliminate or get rid of something. So we're on the synonym track here at least. And prevent occurs once, and that's to keep something from happening or arising. Not exactly the same, but in this category, we're basically talking about making sure that risk is not possible, right? If it doesn't, what's not there can't leak, right? Kind of thinking is what we've got there. All right, so we've got those words. What else have we got? All right, the word reduce, right? 18 times. That was the one we were hoping to see, so I'm glad to see that one was in there a lot. Again, the definition makes smaller or less an amount, degree, or size. Minimize, depending on which, whether you're in Europe or you want to use the American spelling. But it shows up both ways, is what the point is there. So that shows up 8 times, okay? But as we said before, that appears to pretty clearly align with reduce as a synonym. So again, shouldn't be problematic. And then we've got that lowest possible level, which actually occurred twice in the document, okay? But again, if you look up lowest, smallest quantity, number, or degree possible. So I think it's on the same track there. And then you've got as far as possible, right, the thing we were looking for, and that occurs 16 times there, okay? And again, to the maximum amount that can be reached or accomplished. And so when we look at these, right, we're talking about the diminishing risk versus not having a risk there in the first place kind of thing. So at least there's a pattern to all of it, okay? But it isn't definitive in terms of, that term, reduce as far as possible kind of thing. So we focus just here on this stuff. The only time you see reduce is in conjunction with other statements. Okay, so it's always a qualifier of some sort. What do we think we've got here? Whoops. Oops, yeah, there we go. That's where I wanted to be. Actually, I got ahead of myself. So I see a couple of possibilities. They just missed it in the editorial process. And it's just a mistake, right? It shouldn't be there. Or is there something particularly special about substances and particles that don't have to be reduced as far as possible? Which one would be more logical, do you think? I think they made a mistake, yeah. I think we can look at that. But again, right, those kind of mistakes leave open those nasty arguments that happen on the web where somebody goes, see, I was told you it wasn't in every case, which was kind of the gist of the gentleman who opposed the poll, but actually he was taking it in another direction as well. But, I almost felt like I had to apologize to him. Okay, you caught it. There was the one place where you're right. It doesn't say it in every situation, but I think, most of us would agree it's probably just something they missed, right? And it is an outlier there. So I think what you take away is, right, the wording was inconsistent, which you hope you wouldn't see in regulations and standards. You hope they're better at it than that, but we know those kind of mistakes. I mean, this isn't the only mistake you're gonna find in the MDR, right? If you read through all of it. So I think the goals appear to be consistent throughout all of this. Either eliminate the risk, always great if we can do that, and where you can't, you keep endeavoring to reduce the risks until there just aren't any options available that wouldn't negatively impact the features or the benefits of the device. In other words, yeah, EU wants you to go as far as possible.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, questions? Anybody want to challenge on that? Anybody hate the thought of what I just presented? No. Right there.
Steve, first of all, thank you for going into so much detail and helping us understand this. To me, it seems like there's a clue here. And the clue here is for us to, as far as elimination is concerned, think about removing the hazard. That's a pretty good clue.
Yeah.
The second clue is we got to decide early on what the acceptable level of probability severity combination that would be tolerable.
Yeah.
So I think what they are giving us also is a clue on how to do it in different conditions, in different circumstances. I thought I'll make just that comment. I didn't have a question, but I wonder if...
Yeah, I would agree. Where you see some of the variation in the words or the qualifiers, I think they are just trying to maybe create a little bit of differentiation in sort of the criticality of different elements of the GSPRs. But underlying that is still, we want you to take this as far as possible. And to your point about it is usually better to eliminate, which is why, right, when they give you the options for how to reduce risk, number one is inherent safety in your designs, right? Because that would imply, first let's design it out, if at all possible. Then start thinking about risk reduction from there. And then the question is, how long does that go on? And the EU has said, for a while, kind of thing, right? There. Great. Other questions?
Thanks for the presentation. My question is regarding benefit-risk ratio, because it also talks that you reduce the risk as far as possible without affecting the benefit-risk ratio.
Right.
Now, this ratio can be a number or can be a qualitative data, as we have also looked into the previous presentation. So how to justify? You may have 10 benefits, and they are still outweighing your risk. You might reduce to the 8 benefits, still outweighing the risk. So when do you need to stop? Or, I mean, what's the point maybe here to...
Yeah, so, right, under ALARP, you'd be able to stop as soon as you're able to demonstrate, right, hey, the benefits outweigh the risks. So we've gone as low as reasonably practicable. You could make that argument there. But that was what the EU hated. They said, no, if there are still options to get meaningful reduction yet, you keep going. Right? You have to go until you get to kind of the point of diminishing returns. So yes, you may have already been able to demonstrate that the benefits outweigh the risks, but why be happy with that? Right? Keep trying, keep making it even better until you get to that point. Well, yeah, we could do this. It would cost a ton of money and resources, and we'd start getting a very small reduction, if any. Right? Or the only thing left would be to pull a feature off a device, and that wasn't the intent at all. So. Yeah, the EU is just saying, look, the challenge should be to keep going. Don't get to a point of complacency and go, oh, we can rationalize that through benefit risk. They're going, if you have options available, keep applying them.
Okay, so
like make that ratio as good as you can, basically.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. There's a question over here.
Hello.
Hi.
Just to clarify on the as low as reasonably practicable for the IVDR. I think it's actually deliberate because the IVDR is an assay, so there are reagents, there are substances that could be carcinogenic, mutagenic, or have effects on reproduction. So I think it's as reasonably practicable or as low as reasonably practicable in the sense of the performance of the device. So it's slightly nuanced, and that's why the discussion really was focused that way, because you don't see that in the MDR.
Okay. That's a really good perspective. I like that. So I appreciate you bringing that here. I see some nodding heads, so we've got some agreement that maybe that was intentional on the IVD side. Yeah, there's a question there.
I just want to say something that I think you have to be a little careful. Has anybody been asked where they've documented all of those different things? I'm only saying that because the EN version has a statement in the bottom, in the Z annex that says where a reference of the clause of the standard says that you have to reduce as far as possible, blah, 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 that you have to follow those requirements. So I maybe, and of course that's the legal issue. That's all legal.
Yeah.
But has the notified bodies or the auditing organizations asked for that? Because I know some organizations, they've been asked, why do you only have as far as possible? Where are you showing these other ones? So anybody had that issue? No? No auditing?
Nobody's had that experience. I haven't come across it either.
You haven't come across it? Okay.
So I don't know if that's just because they're not bothering to look at that, you know, or
Means the same as these.
yeah, right.
You have to look at the GSPRs.
Yep, exactly. Other questions, thoughts? Oh, there we go.
Thanks for the presentation. It's great to roll through the standard and see everything that comes through it. I'm probably answering the question myself, but just looking for your perspective. Has there ever been, and I've looked and I can't find it, but has there ever been clarification with regard to the authors with regard to why there's so much variation in the language, or have they ever released anything, or from your perspective in engaging with them?
Not that I've heard. So now I'm not as well tied into the people that work on something like the MDR. We were having a discussion last night about, I wonder how often they do a review, right? We know ISO standards go through periodic review. I don't know the regulations are required to, and you know, they don't seem to change very quickly. So I'm going to bet nobody's having that conversation. They probably got done, patted themselves in the back, and went on to something else. So.
Well, I think I can add one thing to the previous question. I think there are 26 official languages represented in the EU that collaborate on writing one text in English. I think that explains a lot.
Yeah, that's a good point as well, right? Lost in translation is always a possibility. So, again, I would expect that somebody, though, was the English editor and would be watching for that inconsistency. So, unless, to the other gentleman's point, that one outlier was very specifically like that because it only applied to the IVDs. Yep. All right, any other questions?
Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate your talk today.
Yep.